Not all heroes wear capes, and not all superheroes play nice. One might even say that some of these heroes are part of the game only for the violence. While they save the day when needed, isn't without bloodshed, for these bloodthirsty superhumans seem to relish violence. Why tackle the villain and hand them over to the authorities when you can slice them into ribbons? In this marvelous video, we're going to discuss the 12 most ferocious superheroes in Marvel. Which superheroes have a real knack for making a mess, usually out of those who dare cross them? Let's find out. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The U.S. Marine who channeled his grief into rage. Frank Castle, who later took up the alias of the Punisher, experienced a tragedy that changed the trajectory of his life. Frank Castle began as a U.S. Marine who served in Afghanistan along with his friend Billy Russo. The pair joined the Special Black Ops team known as Cerberus Squad, led by Officer William Rawlins. Frank eventually decided to exit the team and go back to his family, only for them to be killed in the Central Park massacre. Shaken by the murders of his loved ones, Frank vowed to wipe out crime entirely from New York. He then became the Punisher, channeling his grief into a rage. He went on a rampage and tore through gangs of criminals. The Punisher is most popularly known to be a foe of Daredevil. Frank uncovered the shocking fact that his best friend, Billy Russo, and former boss of the Cerberus Squad, Rawlins, had planned the massacre to take him out. The Punisher irreparably mutilated Russo's face. Over the years, Frank grew more violent and reached a murder count of 48,000 people. Logan's claws never fail to draw blood. The animalistic Wolverine is often synonymous with sheer violence. Abused by his drunkard father as a child, Logan experienced severe trauma during his developmental years. He was pushed into a life of loneliness once his mutations manifested, but this way of living also made him an unsuspecting victim of the Weapon X program. He underwent the excruciating enhancement of his skeleton being covered in adamantium, making him the mutant we know today. Ironically, he joined the peacekeeping force of the X-Men and constantly clashed with his teammates on account of his aggression. But he found community nonetheless and began to unravel the pain he carried with him most of his life. However, Wolverine could never escape his history of bloodshed, since he often flew into a berserker rage, which made him instinctively crave violence. He brutally beheaded his long-standing arch-nemesis, Sabretooth. Logan even slaughtered all of his adult, illegitimate children. Fans still consider the morally gray mutant to be an anti-hero. Given what life threw at him and the violent procedure he underwent, the duality of Wolverine still stands. The merc with a mouth and blood on his hands. Beneath the jokster's exterior lies a man with a soft corner for violence. Similar to Logan, Wade Wilson also went through a tumultuous childhood only to land in the Weapon X program. Prior to this, Wade had turned to a life of crime as a youth and later discovered that he had cancer. This made him break up with his long-term girlfriend, Vanessa, and he even gave up on his chemotherapy treatments. During the Weapon X program, he was the victim of unimaginable torture at the hands of Dr. Killebrew and the sadistic Ajax. They even played a game of Deadpool, which involved predicting how long a subject could withstand their torture. In fact, it was Wade's lust for vengeance that regenerated his torn-out heart, and thus he became Deadpool. Armed with his iconic katanas, Deadpool turned to the mercenary life and took great joy in killing his enemies. Subjected to horrifying pain himself, Wade saw no reason why his foes shouldn't suffer similar fates. A scene that summed up Deadpool was when he shot Ajax in the head in the middle of Colossus's "What It Means to Be a Noble Hero" speech. Johnny's blazing spirit of vengeance. Jonathan "Johnny" Blaze started out as a motorcycle stuntman who went on to become one of the most powerful heroes in Marvel history, Ghost Rider. Johnny was the son of Barton Blaze and Naomi Cale, who worked alongside Crash Simpson in motorcycle stunt shows. As these stories go, tragedy struck when Johnny's mother seemingly abandoned her son and husband. To add to his misery, Johnny's father, Barton Blaze, died in a motorcycle accident. The truth was that Johnny was almost meant to be Ghost Rider, for a familial curse was placed on his mother's bloodline. He discovered that his adoptive father, Crash, had cancer. Johnny decided to meddle with the occult and made a deal with Mephisto to save Crash's life in exchange for his soul. Initially, he transformed into the spirit of vengeance, aka Ghost Rider, whenever innocent blood was spilled. Two of his most hardcore powers, soul consumption and the penance stare, are comparable to psychological torture. This involves eating the souls of degenerates and the guilty staring into the eyes and experiencing every bit of pain they've caused others. Pretty harsh, right? Eddie and his parasitic symbiote. Venom as a character has gone through various reimaginings over the years. His first appearance was in the 1984 comic The Amazing Spider-Man #1. Venom is a tricky character to categorize, since he's shown up as the hero, villain, and anti-hero depending on the situation and what's at stake. Eddie Brock was a disgraced reporter who felt like Superman destroyed his life. Eddie was quite literally on the brink of ending it all when a sentient alien symbiote sensed his thoughts and chose him as its host. Thus, Venom was created. While Venom has worked for the greater good, including looking over the homeless of New York, his version of what's right might be warped. While innocents had been killed by Venom, he still considered himself as a lethal protector. Venom's wrath, combined with Eddie's hypocrisy, has led him to become highly morally conflicted. For instance, during one of his first appearances, Eddie sat in the church contemplating the new symbiote within him. When approached by a police officer, the Venom symbiote began to smother the poor man and led him to a slow, suffocated death while it stated, "Innocent death is always unpleasant, but nothing must stand in our way. Nothing must block our righteous revenge." The killer of his own kind. Eric Brooks, who would go on to become Blade the Vampire Hunter, was Lucas Cross's son. Cross was part of the Order of Tyranna, an organization that dealt with occult beings like vampires. While Cross's wife was pregnant, she faced a few complications, which prompted her to see a doctor who turned out to be a bloodthirsty vampire. The doctor fed on Cross's wife while she gave birth, essentially passing on his vampirism into the baby's bloodstream. Thus, Eric Brooks was born as a Dhampir, which means half man and half vampire. Sadly, Eric's mother died during childbirth. A renowned vampire slayer named Jamal Afari took an orphaned Eric into his care and trained him in the ways of a vampire slayer. As a teenager, Eric took up the alias of Blade and even equipped himself with an array of razor-sharp weapons with the intention of avenging his mother's death. Throughout Marvel history, Blade spent a chunk of his time trying to hunt down Dracula. Blade's conversation with Punisher clarified what his endgame really was. Blade claimed that even if the two got their revenge, they would still keep going. This meant that they savored the killing, the pure, merciless killing. The violent warrior of the moon god. Mark Spector wasn't always the Fist of Khonshu, the moon god. A traumatic event in his childhood led little Mark to develop dissociative identity disorder, which manifested as two other alters, Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley. A conflict amongst his mercenary group resulted in Mark nearly dying in Egypt, but he managed to drag himself under the idol of the Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu. At that moment, Mark's life was bargained with. Khonshu agreed to let Mark live at the cost of his service to Khonshu. Thus, Mark Spector became Moon Knight. But he wasn't the noble hero everyone expected him to be. Moon Knight is known to be an extremely violent masked vigilante who wouldn't hesitate to slice down his opponents. Moon Knight's signature weapons are his crescent moon darts, which function as throwing blades. One example of his violent endeavor is when he faced off with his arch-nemesis, the Bushman. Moon Knight used his crescent dart and sliced off Bushman's face, after which he held up the flesh in triumph. The lethal Scarlet Assassin. Elektra Natchios was the daughter of Hugo and Christina Natchios. Elektra faced a tragedy early on in life when her mother was shot down on their vacation. After her mother's death, Elektra experienced mysterious visions from an unknown source, which prompted her father to send his daughter to therapy. At age 10, Elektra started training in martial arts and showed great skill in combat. She wished to join the group of warriors known as the Chaste, but they wrote her off as too aggressive. Elektra Elektra met Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, during her time at Columbia University, and they eventually fell in love. The pair slowly transformed from lovers to enemies. After her father's accidental death, Elektra decided to leave everything behind and find those responsible for her father's death. She tracked down the terrorist and gouged his eyes out in sweet revenge. Elektra was hired by the kingpin of crime as his head assassin, for she proved to be a deadly weapon. Elektra has been compared to a cobra for how fast she strikes. While considered a hero by some, her methods aren't always neat. The Green Goliath fed by fury. If there were a face of unprecedented, unstoppable violence, it would be the Incredible Hulk. Dr. Bruce Banner was a physicist who worked under General Thunderbolt Ross on the development of a deadly gamma bomb. In his attempt to save Rick Jones from wandering around the test site, Bruce was exposed to abnormal amounts of gamma rays, which triggered his transformation into the Green Goliath. As the Hulk, Banner would fly into blinding rages and rampage through whatever stood in his way. The Hulk is fueled by fury and satiated by violence. He's an out-of-control embodiment of rage. Some of his most gruesome kills include the Ultimate Hulk storyline, in which he tore Wolverine in half and threw his remains over the peaks of a mountain. Some of his darker selves include a cannibalistic Hulk. This kill might be a little too gory for the MCU, as in his fight against Abomination, the Hulk tore off his enemy's hands, beheaded him, and went on to feast on his remains. Like father, like son. Scar was the son of the Incredible Hulk and Kyera the Old Strong. A young Scar was seized by the Shadow People, and they branded him with tattoos. After this, he was taken in by Ol Sam, who patiently taught him how to communicate with others. During his exile to Earth, Scar instantly attacked a chopper on his arrival, justifiably so, since the helicopter attacked a helpless coyote pup. He eventually met Bruce Banner, who had momentarily lost his ability to transform into the Hulk. Banner offered to teach Scar how to fight against the Green Scar version of the Hulk. His father then arranged a mock fight between Juggernaut and Scar, which the latter won fairly. Scar inherited the power to manipulate earth and rock from his mother. He is his father's son after all, which means he also flies into a violent rage every now and then. Scar claimed to be the killer of killers, and like his father, he is fueled by pure rage. However, the only saving grace is his inner child's voice, which proved helpful at times to cool off his temper. The forces of light and dark in him. Robert Reynolds' beginnings were bleak. He was a meth addict who broke into a mysterious laboratory and stumbled upon the Golden Sentry Serum, which was a mutated experimental strain of the Super Soldier Serum. Robert recklessly drank this serum, which granted him immense superhuman powers of 1 billion suns. Robert then patched together a costume and debuted himself to the world as Sentry. At first glance, Sentry represented everything good. He was the golden sunshine hero ready to save the day at any moment's notice. That is, until the Void walked into the picture. The Void was a destructive entity that was bound to Robert's consciousness. It was his buried despair which fed off of Sentry's powers. The malevolent Void was an agent of chaos, and the constant battle between the good and the bad led to destruction on a cataclysmic level. During his time with the Dark Avengers, the Void momentarily gained complete control of Sentry. In this state, he annihilated Asgard and defeated the Avengers, ripping Ares in half in the process. A violent conscience with such catastrophic powers is a dangerous combination. The Guardian of Hell's Kitchen. Matt Murdock's pitiful father wished his sons to be more successful than he was. He pressured Matt to study instead of enjoying his time as a kid. Matt's bullies nicknamed him Daredevil. A young Matt took to his father's gym to work out his frustrations. One day, Matt saw a blind man about to be run over by a truck, and he rushed to push the stranger out of danger's way. The truck crashed, and the toxic chemicals inside splashed across Matt's face, blinding him. As he recovered, Matt realized that all his other senses were enhanced, and he got a radar sense. He was trained by the Ninja Master Stick and grew increasingly skilled in hand-to-hand combat. In his career as a hero, Matt, or Daredevil, was made the protector of Hell's Kitchen. This job hardened him, and he began resorting to slightly more violent methods of dealing with his foes. A few of his violent tendencies showed face in various instances. When Bullseye killed his former lover, Elektra, Daredevil wished to exact his revenge. The man without fear beat down his archenemy and carved out a bullseye symbol on Bullseye's forehead. And how can we forget about the time when he beat Kingpin to death? Marvelous verdict. While most superheroes are shown to be noble and well-intentioned, these select few aren't afraid of getting their hands dirty. How else are they supposed to strike fear deep in their enemies? Most of the heroes we spoke about today battled with their inner demons and ghosts of the past. This unveiled a sadistic, grittier part of them that feels compelled to resort to violence. For some, it's even their signature. Could you imagine Deadpool without his incessant jokes and gruesome ways of killing? It's admittedly quite impressive how creative these superheroes got with their violence, as their moral compass steadily grew gray. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.